we are going to move on to our second keynote speaker, who is Moshe Cohen, the former and first president of Israel One Tech Solutions.
Good morning, His Highness, and thank you so much for, give us the opportunity to be all together today in this very unique gathering. Good morning, Mr. Adnan, the chairman, the visionary, the creator, the person that gets people from around the world to look into the future in a very, very unique gathering here today. What I'm going to talk in the next few minutes is something very different from all the amazing things that we all heard in the last day here. And by the way, I'm the former president of Israel High-Tech Industries Association, which was the country national association, in the 80s and 90s. But before I will tell you the unique story about Israel, the startup nation, and how the whole thing started, I would like very much to tell you about my life philosophy, which maybe will make everybody understand how things which are impossible become possible, like you made it in Dubai, because I believe that the only way to do the impossible is to think it's possible. So my life philosophy is simple. And I believe that every person which have a dream should go the way. There are three things to make a dream happen. It's to dare, it's to believe, it's to go all the way until it's happened. To dare means to do what nobody thinks. It's to dare to do the unregular, the special, the different. To believe in what you do, and then to go all the way, regardless the difficulties, regardless the crisis, regardless the pain, regardless what you need to pay personally in order to make the dream happen, you need to go all the way. And if you do this, you create an opportunity to make your dream happen. All my life, I teach my children that that's the only way to think big and to make dreams. And as a result of this, possibly, maybe, even my son, which is by himself a global entrepreneur, have built the award-winning Coversea, which is the first digital bank for commercialized real estate investment, which is an amazing venture in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a huge life experience. I have visited more than 100 countries in my life. I've seen it almost all. My hobby is anthropology, so I used to investigate ancient societies, the way people live, the way they think, and what they are creating. But I never, ever visited a country like Dubai. I never, ever saw a country that their leaders had this impossible dream to take a desert and to turn it to the future country of the world in 50 years and become the country of unlimited possibilities like America was before. Leaders that dare, leaders that believe, leaders that went all the way to create this future. But in another place in the world, which is the special story, there was Israel. 74 years ago, Israel was created, become independent. And the only resources we had in that time were only two. We had salt in the Dead Sea for export, and some agriculture and oranges for export. There was nothing more. And this is the very special story of Israeli startup nations. It all started in the 80s, when the few first venture high-tech companies have started. But they had no chances. There was no environment tools around them to actually enable them to grow. Companies have made some R&D, but when they wanted to go to the next stage, they needed about $5 investment of marketing and production on every dollar they needed to invest in R&D. But this wasn't around because nobody believed in high tech in that times. I also had a startup, so I decided to make a move, to take our destiny into our hands. I gathered around me some of very special brains and minds of entrepreneurs, and we decided to start, was elected as president of Israel High Tech Industries, and we started a country campaign, public campaign for the government, because they didn't believe in us, to say that we want to become the preferred target economically of the state of Israel because we are the future. And everybody was laughing because the heavy industries, the traditional industries, they controlled everything. And we were just, few young people, entrepreneurs, that could not do very much. I even remember myself taking a CD disc and going to government meetings to try to convince them that software is an industry, that software is the future. And he used to say to me, but where is the machinery? Where is the tools? This is not an industry. This is nothing. And they didn't believe. But I never take no as an answer. I believe in making the impossible possible, and I don't care if I have a target, I go all the way. And it doesn't matter what is on the way. And it doesn't matter, nothing will stop. If I believe in it, I'll go with this. And then, in the later 80s, I've decided that we need to inject capital into the high-tech industries in order to enable them to grow. Because there was no environmental tools around at all. There was nothing. And I also knew deep in my heart that unless the government will vote confidence on high-tech potential, the private sector will never join, which was the case. So I have created with my friend maybe one of the most unique financial tools that I'm sure that nobody heard here and nobody heard before. It was just for a historical period, for a certain moment. I went to the government and I say, I want to establish venture capital funds by law, and I want the government to be involved. But usually, government doesn't invest in companies. So I say, I want the government to guarantee the venture capital funds that will be established for high-tech investment, that if within 7 years the investor doesn't get back his investment, the government will give him back the nominal value. And it was a big fight, a big no, a big non-belief. But I didn't give up. And then in a certain moment, at the end of the 80s, I'm sure you heard the name Shimon Peres, former president of Israel High Tech, former president of Israel, former prime minister, which coincidentally or not, in certain times, I was his chief of staff. In that times, he was appointed the treasury minister. And he was a dreamer. And he believed. And he instructed the treasury to work a solution. But they didn't want to. They made all the obstacles. and we go and fight against each of them policies until a legislation is put together. But here is something very special. They wanted to have public venture capital funds so the public invests, and if after 7 years the investment doesn't work, they get the money back. And I knew that public funds could be very complicated, so I did not agree. So we went through a crisis for months and months and months, and high-tech companies closed down, and Israel technologies, start to disappear, move to other countries. Was very difficult times. And then one day, one morning, Shimon Peres called me. I was in that time also the treasurer of the government party, his party. So I probably was one of the most powerful people in that time in the country. And he said to me, Moshe, at 4 o'clock today, there is a crisis and the government is going to fall. There will be no government after today at 4 o'clock. I closed the phone. And by the way, this story is the trigger of Israel's startup nation. I closed the phone. I called the chairman of the finance committee in the parliament and I say, we are willing to compromise. Call the committee, but I have only one condition. I want the committee to make a decision today, and I want the law to be passed today, before 4 o'clock. Obviously, nobody knew anything about what's happening. Committee have gathered together, they made a resolution, the law passed. What's happened then? 4 o'clock, the government fall down. In the month after, venture capital funds have started to raise up. They started to invest tens and hundreds of millions of dollars into the high-tech industries. High-tech industries started to perform. Billions have been invested. And through the years, this was actually that day, that moment was the actual trigger which actually moved everything forward. Israel have grown from 500 million export at the end of the 80s to over 70 billion now. Startup companies from some tens become tens of thousands. And then, after this happened, I realized that yes, you need to dare, you need to believe, and you need to go all the way. But there is only one thing which I missed, that after you do all this and you create all the opportunities, you need one more thing, which is luck. Luck is not falling from the sky. Luck is to be on the right time, right place, right moment. That day that he called me, that we passed the law, was the beginning of everything. So to conclude, I would say, as you understand, that nothing is possible, and that the most important thing, if you want to make a dream happen, is to believe that the impossible can become possible. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.